Can you all stand with me real quick? Stand up. We're gonna stand up. Stand up. I want you to high five your neighbor right next to you. High five him. Over her. High five over her. All right. Listen up. Listen up. Listen up. All right. Stop high fiving him. That's not 8 fives. You got 2 people next to you. Emily, stop hitting me. Look at your neighbor. Look at your neighbor and say, y'all ready for this? Now say it to the other neighbor. Turn and say it to the other neighbor. All right. Now take a seat. Take a seat. If you got a cell phone out, put it away. You got a cell phone out, put it away. And I'm really excited for this moment. This is my friend. I got to know him over the past year, and God has been doing some incredible things in his life, and I'm so excited for you to hear how God has been present all throughout his life, every step along the way. And so, would you guys, let's clap a little bit. Let's clap a little bit.
Thank you everyone for the wonderful introduction. There is a lot more of you than the high school kids, so you know, I hope my story impacts you as much as it did them. For those of you who don't know, I am Dylan, as Tom said. I am a high school leader, and I also attend South Creek campus and work with some of the middle schoolers over there. I think I see a few of you that I know. I know Marcus. So yeah, I come from a pretty deep background. I'm watching out for you guys, orange team back there. I've been watching you guys. So I come from a background without a father. My mother was single, and obviously it wasn't always that way, but my real father wasn't in the picture. And though I acted like it didn't really bother me, it did growing up, you know. And then when I was about 7, she got married to my stepdad, and I had a father figure in my life, finally. And he was a great man, still is. He did everything he could to provide for me, and he loved me like his own, treated me like blood, more than anything I could have asked for. Like any human being, he wasn't perfect. He drank, still drinks to this day. It's always kind of been his vice. He's had a rough past himself, but you know, he was saved by my mother's love, and through him I met my grandmother, which was his mother, and she had like one of the most strongest faiths I've ever seen in a person. She had this saying, have a blessing, if you don't get one, create one. And she would say that whether you were the person working at McDonald's drive-thru, or if you were her family, or just, you know, some stranger on the street, she loved everyone equally, and that was really probably one of the best role models I've ever had in my life. She made sure that I was in religion class, which is, you know, Sunday school, and that was at a Catholic church, and she just wanted me to have a faith, because she understood what that faith meant to her, and I know she wanted me to experience that. So we moved around a lot as a kid, so I always did whatever I could to make friends as quick as possible. And that meant, you know, seeking attention by any means, and wasn't always in the most positive of ways. Growing up, I had feelings of fear of being alone. You know, with my real dad not being in the picture, I always kind of wondered, you know, why wasn't I good enough to, you know, why wasn't I good enough for him to stick around? Like, I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about him. All I knew was he wasn't around. I was broken inside, and I just feared loneliness. And I began to develop bad habits. Started with lying. My parents had me in counseling when I was in elementary school all the time for lying. And it was just over stupid stuff, like stuff I didn't even need to lie about, but it was a bad habit, and I continued to go with it. I then started stealing from everywhere, people I loved, people I didn't know from stores. Then habits like pornography and, bullying people who were smaller than me. I was a small kid growing up, and I was bullied a lot, so I took that opportunity to make me feel bigger. And eventually, as I was writing this, I kind of did some studies, because I made a connection in my mind. When I was doing those bad habits, I knew I could get in trouble with them. And I would get an adrenaline rush every time I did that, because I knew if I got caught, I'd get in trouble. And I started to chase that adrenaline rush, and I was wondering if there was any correlation between adrenaline and depression, because that ultimately would lead to to the point I would get to in my future. But so I found out that adrenaline causes high stress and anxiety, which then in turn causes depression. And I say that, I had feelings of insecurity. I wasn't the most popular kid in school, and I just, I felt this need to live up to a standard that oh so often media paints for us, that you need to be this cool, popular kid in school, and you have to have the best-looking girlfriend or boyfriend, and if you don't have this big group of friends surrounding you, then you're really nothing. And that's what media says. And those feelings were inside me, and I didn't really face them. So when I got to high school and I was in 9th grade, I was faced with a decision that, unfortunately, most of you guys will be placed in, and that was the decision to smoke weed or not. And at that time, I didn't know that that decision was going to change the entire course of my life. And, ultimately put me in a decision, which is why I'm up here today. So, when I smoked weed for the first time, I felt this false sense of happiness. Everything was numb. All those worries I had about being in high school and not being popular and living up to the expectations that the world had set for me, they went away. And temporarily, I felt relief from all that. And make sure you hear the words temporary and false, because those feelings didn't last. They were there again, and they were there for many other times, but then they were gone. And I felt many other feelings that, honestly, I hate. As high school went on, I quickly progressed into harder drugs. The weed wasn't really masking those feelings anymore, and those problems weren't going away. And the solution to those problems were. So I needed a stronger masking tape, because weed was just my masking tape to cover up what was going on with me. And then something huge happened in my life. My grandmother, who I loved so dearly, she had been fighting cancer for many years, and it eventually got to her. And the previous years before that, I didn't really spend much time with her, because I cared too much about getting high. I cared too much about being with friends. And when she passed away, I had a big gap in my life that I didn't know how to deal with, because I wasn't learning how to cope in healthy ways. She passed away, and I felt empty, and I felt alone again, and I didn't know what to do. So I did what I knew how to do, and that was to get high. And I started doing harder stuff. I started doing inhalants. I started doing hallucinogens. I started doing prescription drugs, and you know, I was getting them from friends. I was stealing them from my parents' medicine cabinet. I was stealing my parents' stuff and selling it so I could afford it. I was taking my lunch money, wasn't eating, and you know, I was making drugs my priority, not myself, not my family, not getting better. And you know, I started hanging out with negative people. And there's this verse in Proverbs. It's Proverbs 132 in the CEV version. It says, "Sin and self-satisfaction bring destruction, and death to stupid fools." I was a stupid fool. Didn't even know it. I was hanging out with people. I was satisfying myself, or at least I thought I was. So as I'm going down this path, I'm starting to feel real burnt out. You know, I can't really deal with all these things that are going on in me. They're not going away. So, and my parents see that I'm going down this path, and they don't know what's up with me. I told them I was smoking weed, and they're like, all right, well, we need to get you help. And they did whatever they could, and I manipulated them so many times that, you know, I was able to get by. And eventually when I got burnt out and my parents saw that I wasn't going to school and they saw that I was failing, and when I was at school I wasn't at school mentally, I admitted to the fact that I needed help and I needed rehab. So I was in rehab for 8 months, and when I was in rehab, they tell you that when you get out, you're either going to stay clean, you're going to relapse and end up in several other institutions, or you're going to end up in a box in the ground. And unfortunately, that's the sad reality of it. Because I know so many people who are no longer with us from rehab. I know so many people who are bouncing between other rehabilitation centers, jail. And I also know people who are clean to this day. And that's a beautiful thing. But unfortunately, the truth is that doesn't always happen. So, after getting out of rehab, I was one of the cases of relapsing. And for the next 6 years or so, I relapsed over and over again. I've overdosed, I've been in the hospital, and there was many times I thought I was going to face death. And that's a scary thing. And there was times I did stay clean for 6 months at a time, year at a time. And in those times I felt depressed. There was times I was afraid to be alone because I wanted to kill myself. And that's because I didn't face the reality of the fact that there was something inside me that was bigger than me, that I wasn't dealing with, that needed to be mended. Somewhere along the way, though, in rehab, they tell you to get a sponsor, which is like a mentor. And you pretty much go to that person for advice, or when you're struggling, you open up to them and tell them what you're going through, and they're supposed to give you wise counsel, wise suggestions. And one of the times I was like at one of my deepest depressions, I reached out to my old sponsor and I was just like, hey man, are you still clean? Like, what's going on? Do you still go to NA meetings? And he goes, I'm still staying clean, but I don't go to NA meetings anymore. I've turned my life over to Christ, and he's who keeps me clean. And I was just like, awesome man, well good for you. And he goes, yeah. I said, I just, I'm struggling with some stuff. I was wondering if you could help me. He goes, well, read the book of Genesis and start with prayer. So that's what I did, because when you're at your lowest, you have nothing else, you got nothing to lose. So I was just like, all right. So I did that, and I started to see God work in my life, and it was going awesome. And then I fell out of it because I didn't stay plugged in. I didn't have positive friends who were pursuing Christ, and my family didn't really go to church, except for Christmas and Easter. So yeah, after many years of witnessing God and Him working in my life, even when I didn't notice it, I eventually got to the point where I saw people who had God in their life, and they had this dynamic that I couldn't wrap my head around. And I was just like, why do they get to be happy? What do they have that I don't have? And from the outside looking in, it's easy to think someone's just, got better circumstances than you. But truth of it is, these people that I was looking at, they had, their dynamic that I didn't have was God and Christ working in their life. And as the hunger inside of me and the Holy Spirit talking to me inside, he drove me closer and lit this fire that pushed me to learn more and pushed me to get involved and get so far in that I couldn't even fall out if I wanted to. So 100% God saved me from myself and all of the negative stuff that came in that world as well. There's a story in the book of John. I don't know if you guys got Bibles or the Bible app on your phone. If you guys want to read along or just listen. No phones. Just kidding. So it's the story of Jesus healing a lame man. It says, afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" He said, "I can't, sir, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me." I was the lame man, and I blamed everyone else for not getting better, when it was me who needed to accept that. It continues to say, Jesus told him, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." Instantly, the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. After all those years of me being paralyzed by everything that held me down, when I finally listened to what Jesus was saying to me, I was able to walk again. I picked up my mat, which I consider to be my baggage, and I walked with it. And I continue to work on it through Him, through the help of others that He's put in my life. God 100% saved me, no doubt about it. So to end, I have some questions, some food for thought that I just want you guys to think about. You don't have to answer out loud. Just keep it in your head and think about it. Ask yourself, would I or have I ever experimented with some type of substance? If yes, ask yourself why. And deal with that issue, because if you've heard anything from my story, the issue doesn't go away until you face it. Do you know anyone who is on or going down that path? If so, don't ignore it. The worst thing you can do is sit back and watch someone ruin or lose their life. I got this story that I'm going to try to get through real quick. I had a buddy named Richie. Richie and I hung out in the same group, but we weren't really friends. He kind of bullied me, and I didn't really respect him as a person because he bullied me. And when I was about to go into rehab, he told me that he was going to go into rehab as well. And I thought Richie was just blowing smoke because that's what Richie did. And when I was in rehab, about a month or so in,